Hi again guys, and welcome to yet another installment of Beards and Cars. This is my more long-form, discussion-based, especially down in the comments, podcast-style series where we talk about sometimes deeper issues for stuff like Gran Turismo or Forza, maybe YouTube as a whole, even just car talk. And we haven't done an episode in a couple of weeks, and that is for a variety of reasons, one of which was Goodwood, of course, when I was away for that weekend anyway. But this particular topic is one which I think a lot of people will definitely have thoughts about, and of course, I would love to see your predictions down in the description. But as far as my predictions go, I have 4 in particular, and I'm kind of going for more broad stroke predictions for this video, rather than like, oh, I think we'll have Koenigsegg or something like that. These predictions are more so on the fundamental side of the game, rather than specific cars or tracks or stuff like that. And I do believe, straight off the bat, that a lot of people probably will not like many of the things that I have to say about my predictions for Gran Turismo 7. Not that I'm trying to hate on it before it's even out. Certainly not. You guys know that I want to love every Gran Turismo game that comes out. But part of the purpose of this episode is I want to kind of see a measure of what our collective expectations are at this point, based on what we know from GT Sport already, from the past of the franchise, from comments from Kaz himself, from the Nations Cup, from various other things like that, all put together. What is the current climate amongst the community, at least here on the channel, for what Gran Turismo 7 could be, what it could look like, maybe what it will do well, maybe what it won't do so well. And of course, we could always look back on this episode in the future, maybe when it is out, maybe just a few months down the line if Gran Turismo Sport has some radical change, which I don't think it will at this point, but look back and see if things have changed. Now, my first prediction is actually to do with cars, but no specific vehicles as such, and that is that I believe, and I'm going to predict, of course, as the point of the video is, that Gran Turismo 7 will launch with, if not all, the vast majority at least of the cars that are already in GT Sport. And that's not a crazy prediction to make. However, I have a couple of addendums to make to that, and the first is that I believe we will probably see a couple of cars drop out. Maybe a couple of the slightly older models, maybe some of the licensing will be up, or whatever the case may be, but I think some will be left behind. Maybe some popular ones, maybe some unpopular ones, but whatever the case may be, I do think that will happen. In fact, in every Gran Turismo game so far, it pretty much has happened. However, my more specific points as far as the car count is, and I have 2 subcategories here in particular. The first is with regard to the currently dead Vision GT program. What's going to happen with that? Will it even be in the game at all? Will we see more cars? Well, I have a prediction for that too. Yes, I believe the Vision GT program will be in GT7. That could be controversial, or not controversial, but I could see people disagreeing with that, and I could certainly understand why you would disagree at this point. It certainly does seem dead. However, the main reason why I believe it will still be featured is because this exact same thing happened at this kind of point, timeline-wise, with Gran Turismo 6. And that is that the Vision GT program kind of just dwindled out. But the reason why, and I don't recall if I predicted this or not, but I was certainly thinking it, is that they were keeping a couple of them back to have as kind of poster children for when GT Sport was released. Or at that point when the next Gran Turismo was released, because we didn't even know it was GT Sport yet. It's kind of just this little bit of a boost in marketing, where you can show people a couple of flashy new cars in the trailer, maybe some gameplay footage of a car which people think, oh, that looks really cool. And the 2 cars in particular that I formed this evidence based on were the Hyundai, the N2025, and the Bugatti. And a ton of people wanted to drive the Bugatti in GT6. We saw images of it, we saw footage of it. In fact, we saw footage and photos of it in GT6, but we never got it in GT6. And the reason was, a few months down the line, we saw it, and I even did some exclusive driving footage of it at that press event, where it was turned into a poster car, in effect, for GT Sport. That little bit of extra enticement for the trailers and for the fans. Now, of course, not all fans are interested in Vision GTs. And of course, that's a constant issue, because in GT6 there were a number of people who just couldn't care less. Even more so in GT Sport you see that, especially with Group X being what it is. But I do believe they will carry it over. I do think that the Vision GT program will once again be in GT Sport, or actually GT7 I should say. However, I think that they've probably got one or two of them already ready to go, and they're just not going to release them. And you might think, Polyphony wouldn't do that. Let's be honest. Yes, they would. Look at the trailer, for instance, for Gran Turismo 6. The Lotus 970 Formula car was in that trailer. We didn't get it in the game for a long time. So yes, they do absolutely hold stuff back, and once again, they did that with the Bugatti and the Hyundai. So the precedent is already there. They've done it with that game already, so I believe they'll probably do it again. No, I'm not going to predict which cars could be carried over, but let's just say that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. As far as debuts go, I do also believe we'll probably see something like maybe 5 or 10 unique, well, let's not say unique, 5 to 10 either returning or unique cars in GT7. Maybe some that we've really wanted in GT Sport, or maybe something completely new. For instance, it would be like showing a Koenigsegg as an example in the trailer. Now, I'm not predicting that they will, but that kind of thing would be very beneficial for a new game. It builds the hype so much. For instance, when the Gran Turismo 4 trailer first came out and the Bentley was in the trailer, we'd never seen that in Gran Turismo before, so it was a huge deal. The Ford Model T was in the trailer as well, various things like that we'd never had before. It just builds so much extra hype, and if you think about it, it's such an easy form of marketing. You just get one new car that's really cool, you put it in the trailer, and it grows the conversation. Just look at the videos that I do here on the channel about the breaking news and the leaks. People love that kind of thing, even if it's for a car which maybe they wouldn't have chosen. The Lamborghini Espada, for instance, look at the buzz surrounding that, and yet many people probably wouldn't have even heard of it, or certainly wouldn't have wanted it on their top 10 list to come to Gran Turismo, and yet it was still hot news, because anything that's new and fresh and hasn't been featured before especially will always garner that kind of attention. My next point is regarding circuits. Ooh. Even more of a hot button topic than cars are, and this is something which I have spoken to before and doubtless will again, that it makes very little sense to me why Polyphony doesn't put more effort into rendering returning fan favourites like Deep Forest and Trial Mountain, rather than releasing information as to why other circuits can't come, like Spa for instance with the licensing issues. Okay, that's fair enough. From a business point of view, even a child who's playing the game can understand the concept that Spa might be too expensive. Okay, we get that. What are you going to do about it then? That's what we want to know. And here's the issue that I don't understand. These older games, these older circuits from those games, like Trial Mountain, like Deep Forest, and a variety of others, they don't have licensing. They are Gran Turismo circuits. So not making them return, not having these circuits back, midfield, Seattle, various other tracks that aren't technically real. They could make that happen much more easily than something like Laguna Seca or Spa, and yet they still don't. I believe that in GT7, once again, probably in at least some of the trailers, if not all of them, we will see 1 or 2 returning faces. Something like a Deep Forest or a Grand Valley. Grand Valley would probably be pretty high on my list in terms of seeing it come back. I think, not that I would want it so much, but that I think they would probably show that off in a trailer because so many people would be happy about it. It was already one of the more premium level tracks, for instance, in GT6, and that is, of course, if we don't get it in GT Sport prior to this. But I believe that, like with the cars, they will use a couple of these really hot button tracks, maybe like a Laguna Seca and a Grand Valley, something like that, to show it in the trailer to get people more hyped. And of course, having a brand new circuit, something which I couldn't possibly predict, would do that as well. And of course, in GT Sport, we've seen a clear precedent for them featuring those new circuits. However, again, let's pump the brakes a little bit on the brand new circuits, because none of them so far have had anywhere near the kind of fan response in a positive way that seeing those old circuits return would have. You know, you can take a Saint Croix, however you pronounce it, that French track. You can take a Majore, you can take a Dragon Trail, and I will raise you a Deep Forest. I will raise you a Trial Mountain. I will raise you a Grand Valley, and more people would be stoked for those any day of the week. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who prefer the new tracks. I'm saying that in terms of marketing, because this is, let's remember, a business, it would be beneficial to do that. Very, very much so. So I believe they'll have a couple of circuits which will be very hot button choices, probably a couple of tracks which are maybe not quite as important, like these smaller original tracks, but maybe not shown so much in the trailer. My next prediction, if you will, is regarding when we could see it. And of course, this is a pretty big prediction to make. It's a prediction which a lot of people would want to hear, but it's a risky one. So what am I going to say? Well, I'm going to give you an exact date. No, of course I'm not going to give you an exact date. But what I am going to give you is a very interesting indication of how things could pan out. Because, consider this, Gran Turismo Sport actually released at the earliest point in the calendar year of any of the previous 4 Gran Turismo games. Gran Turismo 4, I think it was, released in like November, I think. Gran Turismo 5 and 6 released in November, December time, and Gran Turismo Sport released in October. So there is a clear precedent for it being the end of the year, which of course makes a lot of sense. It's Christmas, it's good for business, etc. So, it's clearly not coming out this year. And I'm going to say that for 2 reasons. One, it's still way too early in GT Sport's release, or since the release, and they're doing way too much with GT Sport for that to be coming anytime soon. And also, we would have seen a trailer now, considering that more than half the year has gone. So my prediction is that I think we will get our first official look, not a leak, but our first official look, a teaser or a trailer, or even some official photos and news from Polyphony in 2020. Probably the first half of the year. And I believe that there is a possibility, not a strong one, because again, this is Polyphony we're talking about, and they're kind of notorious for release dates, but I believe there is a possibility that we could see a trailer, or at least the first trailer, in the first half of 2020, and then see Gran Turismo 7 release at the end of 2020. Now, I think that's fairly unlikely, but as I said, a possibility. I'm not saying it's a good possibility, but it's a possibility. And I think it will also depend on if they really are pushing for that PlayStation 5 release. Because if they are, that could push it off a bit further, of course. So we'll have to see. But again, there are rumours of it being a PS5 launch title, so who knows? It could well coincide with that. But my prediction is getting our first look in 2020 at least. My next prediction is regarding tuning, and this is the last of my 4 predictions for now, and this is one which a lot of people are not going to like to hear. Because one of the major issues that people constantly talk about in the game, myself included, is that the tuning just doesn't feel as good as it used to. It's a very kind of mandatory isn't the word I'm thinking of. It's a very arbitrary, that's the term. It's a very arbitrary system of tuning the car where it's literally just a slider where you can reduce and add weight and reduce and add power. And of course, it's very clearly because of the balance of performance thing, because no previous Gran Turismo game featured that. It was all performance points or didn't even have it. And, in the old days, it was just based on the power of the car. So the fact that BOP is in there, the fact that Nations Cup stuff is so clearly at the forefront, indicates to me at least that I think the tuning engine, and this is my prediction, will remain the same. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see tuning parts in GT7, and I hope I'm wrong on that one, because of course tuning is so much fun. You can get so much more out of the car if you can actually use, racing brakes, turbos, etc. But I just don't see it happening. And this kind of ties into the whole previous 4, or all 4 predictions that I made. But my overall thoughts regarding GT7 and the kind of attitude that I have toward it, the reason why it was these 4 predictions in particular that I chose to make, is because I believe Polyphony, and especially Kaz, has had a taste of what the online aspect of the game can really be like, what it can do. And I think that now that they've had that taster, there's no looking back. I think that a lot of stuff, a lot of features, the graphics, the physics, for the most part at least, from GT Sport will be carried over into GT7 for better or worse in some cases. And I think that the push, the clear push, and the top 1% attitude that Polyphony has clearly displayed that they have is going to continue. And I think that that is the most worrying thing for me. Because regardless of whether Gran Turismo 7 is a more mainstream Gran Turismo title, there is no way Kaz is going to leave all of that Nations Cup stuff behind. Not a chance. He has achieved essentially what he always wanted. From Gran Turismo 1, he wanted to have a game, and I believe he said this in interviews even, he wanted a game that wasn't even going to be a series. It was a game for people who already knew cars, who didn't need to be babied or tutorialed, just pure petrolhead game about racing. He's essentially achieved that with GT Sport, and although of course things can always be improved and changed and updated, he's essentially done it now. And now that he's got that taster, to a degree where no other racing game has ever really achieved it before, with the FIA integration, how seriously it's taken, how much of a big deal it is, the kind of future implications for the Nations Cup drivers, even more so than the Nissan Academy ever was, he's not going to leave that behind. I mean, you would be foolish to think that that will happen. Of course not. So that is most definitely going to carry over into GT7, and I think that that could be an issue. Because as fun as I'm sure it is to be one of those, 20, 30 guys, predominantly, who end up being in the top 1%, what about the rest of us? I mean, let's not forget, that was the whole reason why I started an entire series for that purpose on the channel called the Community Spotlight, because Polyphony is not doing it. I should have never been able to do that. Polyphony should have already beaten me to it. Why would a 40k channel be featuring more community members than Polyphony themselves do? There is something wrong there. So I believe that attitude, unfortunately, will carry over into the next game. I believe that the top 1% will continue to be what they focus on, those Nations Cup drivers. And again, good for them. But at the end of the day, the game and the series may have been Kaz's goal as this amazing recruiting system, which is essentially what it's currently being used as. It's a race driver recruitment program. That's all well and good for him, but that's not why most of us bought Gran Turismo. That's not why we bought Gran Turismo 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. You could argue that about Sport, and you could argue that about the first game, but none of them in between, because the precedent was not there in any of those games for that to be the focal point. So essentially, that would be like me, for instance, here on the channel, doing what I've done for the past 5 or 6 years, catering predominantly to Gran Turismo and to all these other racing games, Forza, Test Drive, Project Gotham, bike games as well. That would be like me suddenly saying, oh, well, for 2020, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop all of that, and I'm going to be exclusively playing Minecraft. That isn't bad news for Minecraft players, but it's awful news for anyone who actually followed this channel for what they are already here for. Likewise with Polyphony, they are literally already doing that. They had games with a massive, loyal, consistent fan base from 2 through 7, or 2 through 6 I should say, even starting with the first game, and they are literally ignoring them. There is no community feature on the Gran Turismo channel. It is left up to GT Planet, of all places, to cater to the community, because the game itself doesn't. That is bad. Let's not mince words. Let's not be fanboys. That is unacceptable. The dialogue is not there. And this is something which will be spoken about again in Beards and Cars when I do a duo episode with Maverick, who you've heard in a couple of the Patreon collab videos. But suffice it to say for now, that worries me the most about GT7, because as long as that attitude remains, it's going to hinder every game that they produce, as long as they have that mindset. And this is not my opinion. I mean, contrary as you may be to it, it's not my opinion. It is purely based on the facts of the situation. It is an unarguable fact that there are no community members from the 99% of us featured on the Gran Turismo channel. There is no drifting featured. There are no drag racing exploits featured. None of that. Nothing except Nations Cup. Their actions show who they have the most interest in. And I'm not saying, again, that catering to the best of the best is a bad thing. The whole point of motorsport is to do that. However, Gran Turismo is not a motorsport. It's a game. And they are losing sight of that. It's becoming a motorsport, which is all well and good if you want to create a new audience, as long as you know that you're destroying the existing one. And although many people will be die-hard fans, do whatever it takes, buy whatever game they put out, many of us aren't. And I have, even in the past 3 or past 6 months, seen people go from completely disagreeing with me to fully agreeing. People who would have bought anything Polyphony sold, completely bought into the fanboy mentality, the completely subjective, support everything they do, they still love me as a fan attitude, and buy anything. Those people have changed. Not all of them, but many of them have, because they're actually seeing, wait a second, what am I actually giving my loyalty to? A brand which has no dialogue with the community whatsoever. The best information that we've had in the past 6 months has been leaks. That's bad. So, those are my quick thoughts on that issue. It will be discussed again at a future time, but as far as predictions go, those are my 4. So, as I said, I'd love to hear yours down below. Could potentially be a controversial episode, and I hope it is. I hope it is. I hope that you disagree with me. I hope that this makes you angry, because it certainly makes me angry. It may be a game. Of course it's a game. But it's not just a game. It's a fandom. It's a business, and it's something about value for money. We've paid for a product. And regardless of people who say, oh, well, they never said it was a full Gran Turismo game. They made it clear that sport was something different. Sure they did. Sure. They clearly marketed to us that Gran Turismo Sport was a game that didn't even have a career mode. Sure they did. Sure. So keep telling yourself that lie as long as you want. Those of us who can actually see and think for ourselves don't agree. So overall, that's it for my thoughts. As I said, I'd love to hear your predictions and also weigh in on the latter part of the discussion as well, by all means. And that's it for this vid, so of course I'll see you guys next time. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.